Welcome to Sitting with Sallie. Today I have with me David Segerts, who is the Community Justice Coordinator for Kakawesea of the Justice Program of Grand Council Treaty 3. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Sallie. It's good to be back.
Yes, it's good to be back. We're going to have to make this an annual thingy. Tell me about your position in the Justice Program.
Well, the Grand Council Treaty 3 has hired me to run a program called Community, oh my God.
Justice Coordinator? Community
Justice Coordinator for Northwestern Ontario. I will be servicing 10 communities in the area, the Rainy River District, and I will be working closely with the Crown, the Ministry Attorney Generals, to try to divert certain incidences away from the courts.
Okay.
So the idea is to try to divert or to stop the overrepresentation of Aboriginal people in the justice system and in the jails.
So basically, if someone has been accused and they can be diverted, they won't end up with a criminal record after they've gone through your program.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and the idea is that the Crown will sit down, I will meet with the Crown and decide which cases are divertible and which ones aren't. And the idea is to try to work with the client to keep him out of jail.
Okay.
And whether it be programming or treatment or restitution.
And David, I really want to go back into more detail about your program, but first let's talk about some of the other programs so we can see how they all kind of link together.
Yeah. Okay.
So one of the programs is a youth reintegration program.
The youth reintegration program was introduced to Grand Council Treaty 3 in 2012, I do believe. And the idea was that they would work with Aboriginal youth who are incarcerated to try to reintegrate them back into the community through different kinds of programming, through cultural activities, language, any form of activity that will redirect their thinking away from crime. And so the idea is to reintegrate them back into their communities wherever they committed the crime and try to bring some balance.
We were talking about, you were saying one of the activities is getting out on the land.
Yeah. Yeah, they have a lot of land-based activities that teaches the youth about the land, where they came from, what kind of trees they have out there, what the purposes are for these trees, cultural activities such as sweat lodges or different ceremonies to reintroduce them back into their community and into their culture.
To get them more connected with the land from which they're living on, and also to get more connected with the traditional culture, it sounds like. Yes.
Right, yeah.
And that plays an important role.
It plays a huge role when it comes to Aboriginal youth because in today's society, a lot of the youth are led astray, and they're like, with the residential school impacts, a lot of the kids have lost all of their cultural values, and their teachings are gone. So it's trying to reintroduce all that back into their system so they can start to feel like they belong somewhere.
Yeah, when you say lost, I can imagine that a lot of young people feel lost. They don't quite know where they fit.
They don't quite know where they fit anymore because of society and the way media plays with them, and they don't really have a role anymore. So it's trying to introduce that role back to them. Back a long time ago, like 500 years ago, every community member had a role in the community, and they served a purpose. And so it's trying to get them back to that, to what their purpose is.
You had to have a role to survive.
Right.
And of course, this comes into residential school and the loss of teachings, the loss of language,
Right.
The loss of, the loss that's gone on for generations.
Yeah, yeah. When you look at the impacts of residential school and what it's done to Aboriginal people across North America, when you lose your culture, when you lose your language, you basically lose who you are, your self-identity. And when you don't have an identity, it's easy to get led astray. It's easy to become a victim It's easy to become infiltrated into a gang or something. So if we can introduce that back into their system and talk about their culture and talk about where they came from and what their role was before, then hopefully we can get to them to say, okay, well, you're right, let's try this.
Let's move along this path.
When I ran a youth integration program in Regina, we did land-based activities with the youth that came out of jail. We had a community garden, and we taught them about gardening. We had different programs where we had we rented a workshop, and we built canoes, and all the kids built these canoes, and then they turned around and they sold those canoes. And so it was like, it was a flow of money coming in to help the programming. And so every time they sold a canoe, there was a lot of pride that went along with it for the kid to say, hey, I built that, or I helped build that. So that's the whole idea of youth integration, is to try to bring them back.
And it's been one of the programs that's been going on for a while.
It's been going on for quite a while from what I know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly how long, but it has been in existence.
And obviously there's been successes in it.
Yes.
Okay. So besides that, what are some of the other programs?
We have another program besides the youth integration called the Indigenous Justice Liaison Worker. And their role is basically to work with the community members from each community to help them navigate their way through the justice system, whether it be questions that may have on legal issues, how to find a lawyer, things like that. So the liaison worker will work with the clients to navigate them.
Okay, and this person is working out of Dryden, I think?
We have one person working out of, I think it's Dryden right now, yes. And so we're hoping to bring it to the other communities like Fort Francis. Wherever there is a court is where we hope to bring it eventually.
And it sounds like that person's role is a navigator.
Right.
To help guide people if they need help.
Yep.
Okay. And what other programs?
We also have my program, which is the Community Justice Coordinator, and I work right now with all the 10 communities in the Rainy River District. But by the end, I should be working with all 28 communities to help them work their way through the court systems, to divert as many as we can away from the justice system and into community-based programming, whether it be restitution or just making amends. So some of the stuff we're looking at are like low-level crimes, like misdemeanors, vandalism, things like that, common assaults. Shoplifting.
Destroying property.
Yeah, those are the kind of things that we'll be looking at. And right now our main focus is working with youth, because there's a good chance that we can grab a youth who doesn't have a criminal record yet and save him from getting one by working through the diversion program. We're not working with people that have a habitual history of crime, because those ones are a little bit more difficult.
They're too far along for this program.
Right. And we're also trying to avoid things like domestic violence, domestic assault, because of all the
That's more complicated.
dynamics, and it's a really complicated issue. To sit in a circle is a little more challenging.
So the Crown will decide that someone is appropriate to divert into your program.
Right.
And you meet with the Crown.
I meet with the Crown on Mondays and Tuesdays. I will sit down with the Crown in the morning. I get the docket mailed to me, and I go through each case with the Crown to decide which ones are divertible and which ones are not.
Okay. And when the Crown says, yes, this one should be diverted to you because they don't have a criminal record, it's not that serious a crime, then what do you do?
The first thing I do is I meet with the accused. I'll sit down with the accused person and find out what his story is, what happened. The most important part of this meeting is that the accused has to take 100% responsibility for what they did. If they don't, they can't fit the program.
So they have to admit that they did it.
They did it wrong.
And they were responsible.
And that they want to make it right.
Okay.
And so my first meeting is with the accused. And once he says, yes, I'm responsible for this, I want to pay them back, or I want to end this, so what do we need to do? Then I will sit down with the victim and find out what their needs are. What do you need to bring balance back, bring harmony back into your home or the situation. The victim will tell me what they need. I will help them gather some people together to sit in a circle. So it's kind of like a sentencing circle where the accused will sit in the circle and he will have to listen to whatever happened.
Okay.
So
And
he will
how many
hear
people
from
are
the victim.
how many people are in the circle?
There's a total of about 10 people. There's myself, the facilitator, a co-facilitator. There's the accused with their supporters and the victim with their supporters. And then we would have an elder sitting in the circle too.
Okay, so it will take a while to get everybody in the circle.
Right. Once we get them all into the circle and we begin the process can take a couple of hours. And then that's it. It's over.
Okay.
And then the accused...
Before it goes over, actually, we're going to take a quick break, but then I want you to tell me what happens during that couple of hours.
Okay, sure.
Okay, so we'll just take a quick break, and please join us back. Welcome to Sitting with Sallie. I'm talking with David Segerts, and we were about to enter into the circle where the accused has admitted his responsibility. The victim has also agreed to participate, and I think that's important.
Right.
And can you just tell me about what happens in the circle and what it's a bit about?
The whole idea of a sentencing circle is for the accused to take responsibility for what they did and to try to make amends, whatever that may take. So when I sit down with the accused, I'll find out first off, are they responsible for what they did? If they say, yes, I am responsible for it and I want to make amends, I'm 100% responsible.
That's a big step, too.
It is a huge step for an accused to say that. And so when that happens, I will then meet with the victim separately to find out what the victim needs. What are their needs? Or what do they need to bring balance back into the situation? How do they bring harmony back to
And I like the idea we had talked about before about it is restoring harmony.
It is.
Yes.
So once I find out what the victim needs, I will request that the victim finds 2 people to support them in the circle. I will approach the accused and ask them to find 2 people to sit in the circle for them, 2 supporters.
And we were talking off air about using an example of someone stealing something from one of the grocery stores.
Right. Say somebody walked into a grocery store and stole $100 worth of groceries, and they got charged. So then the Crown decides that this person that doesn't have a criminal record, obviously something happened to make them want to go in there and steal that $100 worth of groceries, so let's find out. So they would sit down with me and find out what the story was. What happened? Why did this person do this? I would approach the grocery store and talk to the manager and say, okay, what do you need? The grocery store will say, well, you know, he stole $100 worth of groceries, so maybe he can do some community service work to pay it back because we can't take the groceries back. So if we can do some community service hours, that would help. And so it's $100 of groceries. And so when the ministry looks at that, they look at it at $10 an hour. So the guy would be required to do 10 hours of community service work to pay that.
And what else might the store manager say that they would like?
The manager might request that they write a letter of apology. The manager might request that they take accountability, write a letter stating how it's affected them or what they may need to do to right the wrong. And so if I was the store manager, I would say to the accused, well, you know, I would like you to write me a letter of apology, and I would also like you to state in there, talk about how stealing is a crime. And so the accused would have to agree to all these terms.
And I suppose if the accused is a younger person, they might have their auntie or their mother with them, and auntie might say, it's affected me because now I have someone that I've raised to do the right thing, steal, and I feel shame.
Right. Right. That's the whole idea, is that we want to make the accused feel responsible for what they did.
And not just directly to the person or the store that they took from, but everybody who's involved.
Everybody involved. So the accused would have like you said, like maybe an auntie or their mother sitting in the circle with them, and the mother would get a chance to express how disappointed she is at what her son did, and talk about all the teachings that she taught him and why he is listening to those teachings. So the idea is to make them 100% accountable.
I think in some ways it might be more difficult to listen to those who you bring in as the supports than to listen to the people you don't know.
Right. When we look at our system, we have the restorative justice circle is a proactive approach to dealing with a crime, whereas we look at a justice system, it's adversarial.
Right.
It's all punishment, and sometimes the punishment doesn't fit the crime. And so our idea is to try to make the punishment fit the crime in a non-punitive way.
And also to bring what you're talking about, balance, but also to bring awareness to the accused of the harm that's caused not just by the stealing.
Yeah. When I was a young boy, my mother did restorative justice with us because my mother's approach was, if we did something wrong, my mother sat us down and said, this is how your actions affected me. This is how your actions has affected the storekeeper. Now, how do you feel about that? So she put that guilt onto me, onto my brothers and sisters as well. And so every time after that, if I ever had an inclination to commit a crime, I always had that memory of my mother saying, this is how you're affecting other people.
Yeah.
And so that would stop me.
You could hear her voice.
I could.
Yes.
And so, and still today, I still listen to her voice. When I look at restorative justice, I think about my mother and how she disciplined us to avoid getting into a situation.
And part of this has come about, I think, because Indigenous people are incarcerated far too much in Canada.
When you look at the population, it's a topic that people don't want to talk about. It's a really ugly topic, but it's a very real topic. When we have the Indigenous population in Canada at 4%, yet we make up 70 to 80% of the population incarcerated, there's something wrong with that
Something's
picture.
very askew.
And I don't think that it's the 70%'s responsibility. I don't think they're 100% responsible. The idea is that we want to start righting the wrongs and taking people out of the jail system and putting them back into the community.
And recognizing, too, that incarceration doesn't help people get back their lives.
It's like the jails are now the new residential school.
And this ties into another program, Gladue writers that are involved in the court system.
When we bring a client before the courts, they will decide whether this person is divertible or whether they fit into the category of the Gladue report. The Gladue report was initiated back in 2008, I think, and the idea was to try to look at the historical history of each crime. Why did this person do it? What kind of history did they have? Where did they come from? So we look at all the historical trauma in the
generational trauma.
The generational trauma. We look at that and we try to bring that into their history. So when we're looking at a young guy who robbed out of a store, and we look at his past history all the way back to the grandparents and how everything is played into today. How did this boy become this?
And I know you were telling me before about listening to His Honor Justice Gibson read a Gladue report in court.
I had an opportunity to witness just this incredible reading. What really astounded me was the whole courtroom was crying. And I mean, everybody in that courtroom was crying when Justice Gibson was reading the report. It talked about the trauma. It talked about residential school. It talked about his whole family history that brought him up to where he was.
And it was quite a lengthy process, too.
It was like a 4-hour read. It was the Gladue writers spend a lot of time researching each case. So it takes months and months to write that report. And it goes all the way back, the whole family history on what brought them through residential school, the historical traumas, the racism, the discrimination, all the way to where they are today.
And they include recommendations for the court to consider. Yeah.
So once the recommendations are made, the Gladue aftercare worker steps in to make sure that all these recommendations are followed through.
Okay. And the same thing with your diversion program and with the Gladue aftercare worker. If a person doesn't follow through, then they end up back in court explaining to the judge what's going on.
Right.
Okay. We're going to take another short break, and please join us in a couple of moments. Welcome back to Sitting with Sallie. I have David Segerts, who is the Justice Program Coordinator with Grand Council Treaty 3. One of the things that we haven't really gotten into is that the criminal justice system has not served Aboriginal people well. You touched on it with the Indigenous population is about 4%, but 70 to 80% are incarcerated. So there is something wrong with the system, obviously. Part of it is systemic racism.
I think the whole system's been askewed for forever.
Well, look where it came from.
Time. When we look at the justice system, and when we look at our justice system 150 years ago, we had our own justice system. We had our sentencing circles, and we had our, how would you say, I guess the punishment. We had...
Well, again, sentencing circles that went to restorative justice,
yeah.
And I suppose a punishment would have been banishment at one point.
At some points, depending on what the crime was, there would be banishment, but at some point there might be, you might have to help this family for a year. You might have to cut wood for them for a year.
Very different philosophy.
Totally different philosophy.
From punishment.
Today it's punishment. It's all adversarial. And so when we look at the justice system and with Aboriginal people, it's never worked. There's always been that element of racism and discrimination behind it. There's always that element of superiority. And even though it's just, how would you say, it's not real. Like, there is no such thing as superiority. There isn't no color base to say one is superior over the other. But when we look at racism in Canada and racism in the justice system, it plays a huge part because, first off, we don't have a voice. As Aboriginal people, we don't have a voice. Most times, anything that we talk about is discounted, or it's not that important. It's minimized. Racism is one of the biggest topics that's minimized in Canada and in this general area. I know that working in the justice system, it's opened up a whole new, I guess, a whole new realm for me, where I'm able to see the injustices that are happening, where we have 70% of Aboriginal people sitting in jails. And sometimes some of those jails are just waiting for bail. They haven't even gotten to the actual crime yet, or the charges. They're just sitting in bail. And so when we look at that and the overrepresentation of us in these systems, we have to start asking the question, why? Why is this happening to Aboriginal people? Where do we begin that whole process?
Well, in our discussion before this, we actually got a bit personal, and you were talking about how you really feel that this area of northwestern Ontario is quite racist, and it's something people won't talk about.
It's a really sad reality, and it's sad that nobody wants to talk about it, and it's so taboo, because it's something that is affecting society as a whole.
And affecting you.
It's affecting me deeply.
So tell me about
because for myself, being an Aboriginal man, dealing with racism on a daily basis, it's a real challenge. And it's like nobody wants to hear it. Nobody wants to admit it. Whereas it doesn't matter what I do. I can wear a tuxedo all day long. I can drive in the fanciest car all day long. I can go to an executive position that I hold and work all day long. I may be 27 years sober, but I am still looked down upon as an Indian. And it doesn't matter how I dress, I'm still not accepted. I'm still just an Indian and
What does
not
that do
worthy.
to you spiritually?
Well, spiritually, because I have a strong spirit, I'm able to deal with it. I'm able to just accept it and move beyond it. But it affects me financially, and it affects me like emotionally and mentally. It affects me, but I just have to accept it for what it is and try to keep educating. The more people I educate, the more.
It also must affect you trying to find your place in the world.
It's never going to happen, at least not in this time, because I'm always going to be an Aboriginal man in this world, in this time. And there's never going to be a position for me to say, you're accepted as part of society. When I look at, like say for instance, I walked into a store in Winnipeg, and the entire time that I was in that store shopping, I was followed around the store by security. But not one person would come and help me find what I needed.
And you're telling me, for instance, that actually happened.
It actually happens
Yes.
on a daily basis. And they say, get over it. So how do you get over that when it's happening on a daily basis? How do you get over something when a person says, oh, I'm sorry, but I'm going to keep doing it to you anyways? You know, like, so how do you move beyond it? At some point, somebody has to say, okay, we're going to take responsibility and we're going to start working at it. It's really interesting because I was watching CBC News the other day, and one of the biggest topics is how media is responsible for the discrimination and racism. I watched an article on CBC about the boiled water advisory in northern Manitoba, and the next news article was about how they should allow beer from province to province.
Not a good connection.
Not a good connection, but that's how people see it, and that's how the human mind will view that. They're not going to view Aboriginal people as a progressive society moving forward. They're going to view it as, okay, there's boiled water advisory, but they can go drink some beer.
Do you see the efforts at reconciliation as a way forward?
That is a really heavy topic right now in the Aboriginal community, is reconciliation. They talk about reconciliation, but you can't have reconciliation if you're still applying it. If you're still doing if you're still applying oppression and racism and discrimination, you can't have reconciliation. So it has to, I think that the only way that this is going to begin the healing process is for Aboriginal people to take ownership of their own programming and their own healing process. And the non-Aboriginal society has to step aside and just allow them to do what they need to do.
Allow you to find your own way.
Right.
Okay.
And support us in that effort.
And David, I would like to spend a lot longer talking about this because it's a really important topic, but we've run out of time.
Thank you very much.
Well, I'm sure you will join us again.
I really hope to, Sally.
And thank you for joining Sitting with Sally today. I've hoped that some of these things have made you think about things maybe a little differently.